All right, everybody, welcome back to the deep dive. Today we're going to take a look back.
Okay.
It's 2025 right now, so we're going to look back at something that happened back in 2020. This is something that's probably still pretty relevant to all of you out there listening today,
Yeah.
and that is President Trump's executive orders on diversity training.
Interesting.
So we've got this really fascinating article from CBS News.
Okay.
It's from back in 2020, and it really kind of lays out what was going on at the time. If you remember, this was a really kind of controversial thing.
Yeah.
A lot of people were talking about these executive orders. People were debating what the government's role should be when it comes to diversity in the workplace.
For sure.
So maybe just to kind of kick things off, if you could remind everybody,
Yeah.
what exactly were these executive orders all about?
Well, these weren't just, your typical executive orders. These were really aimed at completely dismantling diversity programs, specifically within the federal government. And the Trump administration, they considered a lot of these diversity programs divisive, especially ones that had to do with things like critical race theory and white privilege.
Yeah, and reading through this article again, it's interesting to see how the administration was really framing these issues. They were saying that, these programs were promoting guilt and blame based on race or sex.
Right.
And they were really pushing for, what they called a merit-based system. But I guess the big question here is, 5 years later, are we seeing any, lasting impacts?
Yeah, what are the ripple effects
from these orders?
Exactly.
Would they have actually changed hiring practices?
Yeah, that's really the question, isn't it? I mean, that's kind of the million-dollar question here. And there is actually, some evidence to suggest that these orders may have led to a decline in minority representation in certain federal agencies. And we've also seen a bit of a surge in lawsuits alleging discrimination in hiring after these orders were put into place. But on the other hand, though, there are some people who argue that, these changes were already happening anyway, and that the orders just kind of sped things up a little bit.
Right, yeah. Okay, so that's hiring. But what about mid-state, the overall workplace culture? I mean, you can't just erase years and years of diversity and inclusion efforts with a couple of executive orders.
That's where things get a little bit tricky. It's really hard to measure cultural shifts, directly, but anecdotally at least. Some employees have reported feeling kind of a chilling effect on DEI initiatives after 2020. Yeah, open discussions about race and inequality became less common. And some diversity training programs were either completely eliminated or significantly altered to try to avoid the topics that the orders targeted.
Wow. So it sounds like these orders really did have a tangible impact.
Yeah, they definitely had an impact. But here's another interesting thing. It seems like these orders also kind of unintentionally fueled a counter movement.
How so?
Well, some organizations, they kind of doubled down on their commitment to DEI. They saw the orders as a setback, but not necessarily a deterrent.
So it's this really complex situation where the orders might have hindered progress in some areas, but then kind of pushed it forward in others.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it. It's this weird unintended consequence kind of thing.
Yeah.
And this whole thing brings up a much bigger question.
What's that?
What role should the government actually play in shaping diversity and inclusion in the workplace, especially when it comes to the private sector?
Yeah, that's something that I've been thinking about a lot too. It's this balance between promoting individual freedom, but also making sure that everyone has equal opportunity.
Absolutely.
And it's not an easy question to answer.
No, it's not. But what's really fascinating to me is that these orders, regardless of what their original intention was, they sparked this huge nationwide conversation about these really important issues. They forced people to confront some uncomfortable truths about things like systemic barriers and how we even define merit. And we're honestly still grappling with those questions 5 years later.
It's true. And, looking back at that CBS article from 2020 and everything that we've been talking about, what do you think is the biggest takeaway from all of this?
For me, the biggest takeaway is that even seemingly isolated political actions can have these huge ripple effects that we're still trying to understand years later. And we've been focusing on the U.S. federal government here, but these issues are global. This is something that's happening all over the world, and it really just highlights how important it is to be critical of policies and to think about their potential impact, not just in the short term, but in the long term as well.
Yeah, I think that's a really important point. And, is all of you out there listening are moving forward in your own lives and careers. Think about this. Knowing what we know now about the potential long-term impact of these executive orders. What do you believe the role of government should be in shaping diversity and inclusion initiatives? It's definitely something to think about.
It is.
Well, thank you all so much for joining us for the deep dive.
Yeah.
We'll see you next time.